Okay, hi guys. I'm going to give you a bit of a breakdown of the first section of the evaluation. This is the third assessment type that you do for research project. It's the one that is 1500 words long. It is also the one that is graded externally. So it's worth 30% of your overall mark. It's broken down into a couple of different sections itself, and I've got a few resources to help you with that, and I'll show you through those. So, the evaluation. The performance standards that the evaluation gets marked against. This is the A band, B band, C band. So there are 4 performance standards. Synthesis, which is about the clear and coherent expression of ideas, is marked against all of the areas of your evaluation. These 3 over here are used to define the different sections of the evaluation that you need to do. I'm only going to focus today on E1, which is insightful evaluation of the research processes used specific to the research question. So this is at the A band. We're looking for insightful evaluation. At the B band, it's considered evaluation. At the C band, we're looking at some recount of evaluation of the research processes used. And you'll note again that in the B and the A, we're talking about specific to the research question. So this is what you should be aiming for up here. Okay. This is with regards to E3, and I'll talk more about E3 in a future vid for you guys. Okay. So, what you actually submit with regards to the evaluation, it's got a 150-word summary or abstract. The person who is reading your evaluation and marking your evaluation will not see and read and mark your folio and or your outcome. So they won't have any idea about what you actually did other than in this 150-word abstract. That becomes very important to tell them a little bit about the journey that you went on. We'll talk about that later on. The 1500-word evaluation with 3 performance standards, obviously it's going to break down to around about 500 words per performance standard. You're going to provide a reference page if it's relevant. Please do not include your name or your school. It should only have your SACE number on it. You don't need a cover page. I will provide you with one from the SACE website. It's the one that has to be on there for all work. So, to break it down, S3, clear and coherent expression of ideas. As I said, this covers all sections of the evaluation. It means that there's an obvious structure to your work. So use subheadings that relate specifically to the performance standards. That's the easiest way to do it. It means that your spelling, grammar, language, your sentence and paragraph structure all follow conventions and have been checked. It includes demonstrating an understanding of research language. So, for example, you are not using words like valid, reliable, credible and bias interchangeably. You are using them in the correct context. Make every word count. Don't waste words in recounting what you did. This is called an evaluation, not a recount. Your summary or your abstract should recount a little bit of what you did. Use this subheading specific to the specific features. So for E1, we're looking at evaluating the research processes used specific to the research question. There is absolutely no point whatsoever in telling me why you chose not to interview anyone, because it's not a process that you used. Only talk about the processes that you actually used. So things like surveys, interviews, internet. If you're going to talk about the internet, please make sure you are very specific and you discuss, for example, the use of blogs, the use of PDFs, the use of government organisation websites. You need to be specific. Do not just use the internet as a whole interchangeable type of source. Again, I'll talk about the others in more depth later on. So E1, insightful evaluation of the researcher's processes used specific to the question. This is generally the section of the evaluation that students do their best at. Most students manage to make judgments about the research processes in relation to their findings and the information that were generated from that research process. Note the wording of the specific feature, specific to the research question. So as I said, there is absolutely no point in spending 200 words telling me why you chose not to do an interview. Okay? Only talk about the ones that you did use that were specific to your question. As far as the structure goes, discuss only one research process at a time. And don't confuse judgments about a specific source, for example, a specific website, with judgments about a research process, the use of all internet blog sites. You may have got a lot of information from this one and it may have been fantastic, but as a general source of information, blog sites may not have been at the top of your list. So be careful that you're not confusing those judgments. Watch that you don't recount what you did. For example, I tried to email Dr. Feelgood, I got no response, so I emailed again, I got mum to call, I waited another week, then I went to see his secretary. That is a recount, it's not an evaluation. It is not going to get you into the B or the A grade band at all. The problem is that it doesn't make any evaluation of the process. So don't confuse planning processes with research processes either. So choosing and refining or changing questions is about your planning of your outcome. Creating mind maps, Lotus diagrams, finer tables, again, it's about the planning of your research. Writing, analysing and summarising sources, that is about the planning of your folio, the creation of your folio. It's not about a research process. The sources, finding the actual sources themselves, that's a process. Creating folio pages and visiting planning visits to libraries, etc. are all about planning processes. They are not about the research processes. So they're not valid points in your evaluation. And if you don't get marks for them, don't waste words on them. When you make a judgment, give me a reason for your judgment. For example, use examples, provide reasons, blah, 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 because, blah, 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 this resulted in, blah, blah, blah. Explain your viewpoint or your understanding. Don't use just the internet, break it down into different processes used. So, I used blogs because they allowed me to. This resulted in. I watched 3 different TED Talks because this resulted in, and it allowed me to, etc., etc. Okay? So break those down into their specific different processes. All right, I'm not going to go on to E2 at the moment. I'm going to show you a couple of examples from the SACEboard website and some exemplars from previous students of this section of the evaluation. So this is the cover sheet. You'll have a cover sheet like that I will be providing you with for your task as well. This is the summary. We'll talk more about that later. This is the section that we're looking at, evaluation of research processes. So we've got news articles written specifically for the web. This is a breakdown of the research process. We know that this is internet-based research, and we know that this is what she was looking for, specific news articles. Now they've made a judgment up here. This research process was valid in that it provided current information on the way in which fairy tales reflect culture. They've made a judgment call about the usefulness of this information, which is a really good start. However, these sources were mostly superficial in nature and mainly acted to support larger, more in-depth sources. So again, they've told me how this information linked with other information, and they've made a judgment call on how valid or how valuable this information was. The information provided by this research process was mostly reliable, and again, if you read further down, they've provided reasons for making that judgment. So none of the sources included any outstanding contradictions, with the only slight one being so on and so forth. So they've made a judgment call again, but they've explained that for me down here. Okay. Currency is not a significant factor in the reliability of my outcome due to the nature of my topic. So looking at fairy tales, we're looking at things from hundreds of years ago. So currency, is not, as it says, a significant factor. They've used that terminology in the correct context. So please be aware of those types of things as well. That's a good example. If we continue down, we've then got published journals. Again, it was reasonably valid. The reason for this being so on and so forth. They've actually referenced a couple of specific pieces of information, so there will be a reference list provided at the end of this evaluation as well. It's unlikely that they were subject to bias because so on and so forth. So again, we're looking at the quality of the research, and they're making judgment calls about the quality of the research that they have found. Okay. They've also spoken a little bit about a limitation of the process, was that most of the sources are not particularly recent. Then they go on to a third section. This process was highly reliable because, as a published source, it was likely to have undergone extensive editing, fact-checking before being released. Furthermore, the author is a highly regarded expert in the field of fairy tales, having written several books on the subject and lectured on it for many years. So again, they have provided evidence to back up their statements. Okay. This one, evaluating a car and its owner. If we go down into the research processes, I chose processes which involved both gathering primary sources and secondary sources, so demonstrating the knowledge of the difference between the two, investigated websites, blogs, movie documentary. Then it goes on to limited information provided. It allowed me to set an objective of what I needed to discover in my primary source research processes, so making a judgment call about the quality of the information or how useful the information was. This resulted in great validity and reliability in my secondary sourced research, so this one influenced this one in such and such a way. We're talking down here about people who have been interviewed, supplying with significant and important information, the fact that they have chosen people who are experts in their field and they've making a judgment call about them being effective and valuable terms in quality of information gathered, again, is what the moderators will be looking for. This one is a third example, and again, it comes down to, here's the type of research that I'm discussing and talking about: web-based and library-based research, preliminary research. Here's a book that I started with, a newspaper article on a website. This process was important, so making a judgment call. It allowed me to consider validity, reliability, and credibility. And again, making sure that you're using those in the correct context and not interchangeably. The author is a professor of Asian American Studies and coordinator of Korean Studies. So these qualifications mean that the author is credible. Again, so checking that you are using high quality sources and that you know the difference between what is a high quality source and what isn't. Although the information was valid, I questioned its reliability. The bibliography referenced the works that had been used by the author. However, a significant portion of the book gave the impression that it was based on personal opinion. These opinions were likely to have been developed through his research and experiences, but were not supported by evidence. So a recognition of the importance of evidence in research. Search of the school library and state library of SA did not provide sources which were relevant. Web-based research did not provide all the information as it was difficult to find. The problem was overcome by finding relevant sources in Korean. The article was valid because the information of the article related directly to my topic. The author was a professor of Korean culture and studies, a credible source, so doing that checking, etc. Interviews. So interviewing, who was interviewed, why they were chosen as an interview, being an expert in that field, what happened with regards to that interview, and the different people that were interviewed. Surveys. I conducted surveys in 3 parts. Some of the responses received demonstrate misunderstanding of the questions. For example, one of the questions was, would you cook Korean food at home? Answers such as, I love food and Asian dishes are yum, and I like Asian food, so whatever, meant that there was little understanding of the responses being sought. This highlights problems with the question design. I overcame this by using quantitative data rather than qualitative. So again, it's talking about the actual process of the survey, some of the strengths and weaknesses within that, and how those were overcome. So there's a few examples of what can be done for section E1 as well. There are further examples available for you on the SACE Board website. There is also this document to help you with E1. I'll talk more with regards to this in class, but if you start with your research processes, highlight the 2 or 3 that were most useful for you, and then continue on. With the questions down here, you don't have to answer every question for each process. They are just simply there to help you start thinking about the types of questions and responses you might make for each of those processes. And I hope that that is somewhat helpful. This document here is planning and writing scaffold for E1, and you'll find that on the public drive. in the evaluations folder. Okay? See ya.